Hello and welcome today to our second webinar in a series following the introduction of the Building Safety Act. This webinar deals with the changes which have come into building control legislation or the building regulations, and these changes came into effect on the 1st of October 2023, and this seminar is going to primarily focus on those changes rather than the Building Safety Act, which was what was covered in our previous webinar. My name is Joe Campion from Quadrant Building Control, and with me today is Owen and Shane from Socotec Building Control and also Shaw Building Control. We are all part of the Socotec group of companies. So both Shaw, Quadrant and Socotec are part of the Socotec group of companies, all providing building regulation approvals under three separate brands. However, in 2024, these three brands will be merging together to form a single registered building control approver, which will be Socotec Building Control. So that will be some changes which are coming into effect next year. So please be aware of that, and please look out for it as well. But it will be the same people who you'll be dealing with under a different branding. We're coming to you here today courtesy of the Socotec Advisory Training Suite in Tunbridge Wells. This is a facility which we are now able to use, and we're filming down in Kent today. The presentation will be between about 30 to 40 minutes long, and that will be presented by Owen from Socotec Building Control. And after the presentation, there will be a question and answer session, which will be compared by Shane. So the whole webinar itself, we expect to take about an hour to an hour and a half, might be a bit longer, depending on how many questions come through at the end. But I do think that we're going to spend as much time on the question and answer discussions as the actual presentation itself. There is just one other technical note as well. If you have been on the line for a little while and waiting for the webinar to finish, you may have be experiencing some sound issues with a bit of echoing and such like. If that is the case, if you refresh your browser, that should sort out the problem, and the sound should then come through okay. So today we're going to start off with the actual presentation, and to do this we're going to pass over to Owen from Socotec Building Control, who's going to lead the presentation for you today. So thank you very much, Owen.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everybody. And yes, this morning I'm going to run through this presentation, and I'm going to go through the various bits of the changes to the legislation. So have a look at what changes came in on the 1st of October, and have a look at the effect that these have and how that might affect the building control structure, but also the information that we require. I'll have a brief look at higher risk buildings, because most of today we're going to concentrate on work that's not higher risk building work that you will be dealing with, and work that a registered building control approver or local authority can deal with. But we will mention the higher risk buildings that need to go through the building safety regulator so that you understand the difference between them. We're going to talk about duty holders and the new regulations that impose duties on duty holders and introduce the duty holder regime into the building regulations. And for those duty holders, there's going to be competence requirements for all of those duty holders. So we'll have a discussion about those. We'll then also look at appointing an approved inspector. Currently we're still named as approved inspector, but in April we will be known as registered building control approvers. We'll then start to look at some of the detail and some of the subtle changes that are happening. We're going to look at what's going to be known as start of works, which we might refer to as commencement at the moment, and then we're going to look at a definition of works being defined as commenced. We'll look at declarations of compliance that are required at the end of the project, and then we'll also mention about transitional arrangements for the transition from our existing building control system prior to the 1st of October over to the new system from the 1st of October. So we'll now start to have a look at some of the legislation changes. I'll just get the slide moved forward, thank you. So from the 1st of October, we've got new legislation that's come into force. And we've got the top two there, which are the building regulations, the amendment regulations in 2023, sorry. And these have amended the 2010 building regulations. So our principal regulations are still the 2010 regulations. And to the right-hand side there, we've also had amendments to the approved inspector regulations. So we've got amendments to the 2010 approved inspector regulations, which likewise are still the approved inspector regulations that are in force. But alongside those amendments, we've now got a third set of regulations, which are the higher risk buildings procedures regulations. And so what this means is that we've got three different building control systems. So we've got the Building Regulations 2010, which deal with the local authority route for your building control system. We've got the Approved Inspector Regulations, which deal with the framework and system for using an approved inspector. And now we've got this new system for higher risk buildings, which means the Building Safety Regulator is the building control body for those systems. So let's have a look at how that affects the building control structure. So what we've got now, under the building control structure, we've got two enforcement authorities and enforcement bodies. Prior to the 1st of October, only the local authority were the enforcement bodies for building control. So they were the body that took enforcement action, took people to court, served notices to get work corrected, and they took out all of the enforcement work. As of now, from the 1st of October, the Building Safety Regulator has become the building enforcement body for higher risk buildings. So any work that's carried out on higher risk buildings and any work that requires enforcement action will be taken by the Building Safety Regulator. There are also some new tools added for those enforcement bodies. The introduction of compliance notices and stop notices has been introduced from the 1st of October. And so either the Building Safety Regulator for higher risk buildings or the local authority for all other building work can actually use these tools of a compliance notice to require work to be corrected, or a stop notice to actually stop construction work happening until corrective action has been taken. So under that, we have building control bodies. So up until the 1st of October, if you were carrying out building work, you could use a local authority for your building control body, or you could appoint an approved inspector for your building control work. A third body has now come into play, and that is the Building Safety Regulator. And under this new legislation, you have to appoint the Building Safety Regulator for higher risk building work. So you don't have any option of appointing a local authority or a building control approver for that work. You must submit your application to the Building Safety Regulator. For all other types of work, you still have the option of using a local authority or an approved inspector. And if we remember, from April next year, approved inspectors will be known as registered building control approvers. Within the background to this system, they're going to introduce what is known as restricted activities and restricted functions for those building control bodies. And what that means is that each of those building control bodies must appoint a registered building inspector before to advise them on the systems before they can carry out certain functions and activities, such as issuing plan certificates, issuing final certificates, checking of plans, or inspection of work. And this is going to happen in the background, but it will affect how your relationship and the conversations you have with building control. So if we move on to look at what a higher risk building is, so that you know when you have to go to the building safety regulator. So a higher risk building is a building that has 7 or more stories, or has 1 or more stories that is more than 18 metres above ground level, and it contains 2 or more residential units, or is a hospital or a care home. So the height criteria is applicable to all those types of buildings, and then it's about containing 2 or more residential units, or whether it's a hospital or care home. If you're carrying out work to either create a high-risk building, or you're carrying out work on a higher risk building, you must make your building control application to the building safety regulator. The diagrams that you can see on the left-hand side are quite important to take note of, and particularly the right-hand diagram of those 3 diagrams, because where you're working on a ground that's sloping ground and you've got different ground levels adjacent to the building, where you start to count your number of stories and start to measure that 18-metre height is very important. It's always at the lowest ground level. So what you might consider as basement levels in your construction, or lower ground levels in your terminology, they are likely to be levels where you start to count your number of stories to decide whether it's a higher risk building. So let's start to have a look at duty holders. Now, there's been a lot of talk in industry about duty holders coming in relation to those higher risk buildings and the important responsibilities that those duty holders have. But it's important to note that the duty holder system is actually across the board. So anybody who is carrying out building work that is subject to building regulations will be a duty holder under this new regime. And we have 3 sets of duty holders. So we have clients and we have domestic clients. So those are the people who are actually commissioning work. A client is generally a person who is commissioning work in the course of their business. So they're having some work done. So it can be sort of people having work done to offices, people who own office buildings, and people who are running businesses, but they're having building work done. A domestic client is somebody who's commissioning work, but it is not for the furtherance of their business. So it's the domestic extensions, loft conversions, alterations to dwellings. And so they are termed as domestic clients. We have designers and we have principal designers. Designers have a duty to ensure that the clients understand their duties, but the designers also must take reasonable steps to ensure that their designs, if the building work is carried out in accordance with those designs, will actually comply with the building regulations. So the designers need to be sure that their designs will comply. Principal designers have some additional duties above and beyond all the other designers, because the principal designer is the coordinator of all those designers. So they need to coordinate and ensure that all of the designers cooperate and collaborate on their designs to make sure that the overall design complies with the building regulations. Then we can have a look at contractors and principal contractors. I'll just try and get the slide moved on to the next one. That'll be great for us. Thank you. So we have contractors and principal contractors. And very similar to the designer and duty holder relationship, contractors have a responsibility to ensure that the bit of work that they carry out is compliant with the building regulations. And it's worth pointing out at this point the difference between the absolute responsibility of contractors to ensure compliance and the designer's responsibility to take reasonable steps to make sure that their design, if constructed in accordance with their design, complies with the building regulations. And so those contractors have an important duty to make sure that the building work complies with the building regulations. Principal contractors, just like the principal designers, have additional duties to ensure that all of the contractors collaborate and cooperate to ensure that the whole building work as carried out will comply with the building regulations. And what we can see coming through on this is a matter of competency. People are going to have to be able to demonstrate that they are competent to carry out the design, to carry out the work that they are actually being appointed to do. And so we will be looking for people to demonstrate that competency. And so the change in culture that we're going to be looking at is that people will be one of carrying out the work to ensure compliance and take ownership and responsibility of their part of that system to make sure that we comply with the building regulations. So if we can move on to the next bit, we'll look at how can you demonstrate competence. At the moment, some new publicly available standards, the PAS standards, have been issued by the British Standards Institute. At the moment, there are two standards, one for principal designers and one for principal contractors. If you are a principal designer or a principal contractor, it is very worthwhile having a look at these frameworks, because these set out how you will demonstrate that you are competent to carry out the work. For clients need to have a look at these documents as well, so that they can understand what questions they need to ask of principal designers and principal contractors, so that they demonstrate to the clients that they are competent to carry out the project that they're being asked to carry out. On that, there's a link with the building control body about competence, duty holders, the duties of those duty holders. Building control is going to be a regulated profession. We've mentioned that as from April, approved inspectors will be known as registered building control approvers. We must register with the building safety regulator so that we can carry out the function of a building control approver. But not only are approved inspectors going to be registered, all of the individual building control surveyors are going to be known as registered building inspectors, and they will be registered with the building safety regulator. As part of this, every registered building inspector must demonstrate their competence to the building safety regulator in order to be registered. And you remember I talked about the building control bodies, the building safety regulator, the local authority and approved inspectors having to seek the advice of a registered building inspector to carry out those restricted functions and activities. So this won't necessarily affect you directly and you won't necessarily see this, but it will affect the relationship between you and your building control provider. And part of this is because the building safety regulator is going to be monitoring and measuring the building control profession. They're going to be looking for statistics and key performance indicators to be reported on a quarterly or annual basis. And one of the key aspects is this strategic context document for that regulatory framework. And one of the expectations is that those duty holders that we've just talked about, clients, principal designers, principal contractors, contractors and designers, it is expected that building control will require those duty holders to proactively demonstrate compliance with the building regulations. Building control will no longer be expected to answer the question, does this comply with building regulations? What those duty holders should be doing is they should be presenting a confident, compliant design to the building control body and saying, I think that my project complies with the building regulations because of these reasons, because of this design solution that I've come up with. And building control will just say whether they agree or not with that statement from those duty holders. And so this will change that conversation. So, what's this going to mean in terms of of your relationship with an approved inspector? A lot of the changes are requiring different information to be provided to us. So when you appoint an approved inspector, we're now going to be asking you for lots more information about the project, about the people involved in the project, about the program of the project, so that we can administer all of these new building regulations and also help you carry out your duties which are required under those building regulations. So one of the first things, we're going to need confirmation that the work is not on a higher risk building, because as an approved inspector, we cannot carry out the building control function on those buildings. That has to go to the building safety regulator. We're going to be looking for information of that existing building. What's the height of the top story of the building? You know, this is going to have an effect on who the registered building inspector has to be for working on that building, because building inspectors are going to be registered under different classifications. We need to know when the work is going to start. Now, this is going to be a different terminology. We're used to using the term work commencing. That now has a different definition under the building regulations, and so we're going to want to know when you are going to start work on the project. And the reason that the change of using the phrase start work and when work actually reaches commencement, so the work is going to reach a stage when it will be deemed commenced. And this is so that buildings can't just start with a little bit of work and then retain the building regulations and retain that application at that level. After 3 years, initial notices are going to automatically cease to be in force unless the building has reached that definition of commencement. And so we're going to be needing an idea of when that is going to be, and we'll have a look at what start and commencement means in a little while. But we're going to have that date at the time when you appoint us, so that we can advise of that date on the initial notice. During construction and during the project, we're also going to require some notifications about the duty holders. So we're going to require notification of who the duty holders are, who's the principal designer, or if there's only one designer, a sole designer, who's the principal contractor or sole contractor if there's only one contractor. If those principal designers or principal contractors change during the project, then we're going to require information and notification within 14 days of that change happening. And what we require is we need to know the dates of those appointments of those principal contractors and principal designers. And you'll see towards the end why that is important, because we will be looking at compliance declarations at the end of the project as well. So let's have a look at what we mean now by start of work or work commenced. So the start of work is literally when you actually start the work that is subject to building regulation approval. It's not going to involve demolition or site setup or site strip or anything like that. We are talking about when you are first going to start doing your digging your foundations, or you start putting your first bit of drainage in, or you start to put partitions up if you're putting work doing internal alterations. So that is going to be a start of work, and you must give us 2 days notice of when you are intending to start work. You then carry out a certain amount of work, and at a certain point, work will be deemed commenced such that the project will then retain compliance to the regulations at that time and will not automatically lapse after 3 years. So where you're extending a building or building a new building, then the definition of commencement is going to be having executed the ground floor, the foundation structure and the ground floor slab, and so all of that structure needs to be in place. If you're doing internal alterations or material alterations to a building and you're not involving any extension or foundation works, then you have to describe to us what is 15% of the work that you intend to carry out. When you've carried out 15% or that amount of work, you then must notify us within 5 days of having got to that stage that you have reached that stage and the work is deemed commenced. That will then mean that the application, the initial notice, or the application to the local authority will then remain in force until you complete that project. If you fail to give that notification, then your application will cease automatically after 3 years, and then you will need to submit a further application for that work, and you will then be subject to any new regulations that have changed in those 3 years. If we now start to look at what is completion and how we look for declarations at completion of a project. So you've carried out the work, you've notified us of commencement, you've been carrying out the work, building control will have been doing inspections during the work. However, prior to building control being able to issue a final certificate or issue a completion certificate, then we will require declarations of compliance from the 3 main duty holders, and that will be the client, the principal designer, and the principal contractor. So the client must give us a declaration of compliance and completion saying that the work is complete. To the best of their knowledge, the work complies with the building regulations, and they must give us details of all of the principal designers and principal contractors that were involved in the project. And if you remember the notifications that are required about giving those details of the principal designer and principal contractor during the project, this is when that becomes important, because the building control body will look through their records and they will compare who they've been notified are the principal designer and principal contractor for that project, and when the dates they were effective as the principal designer and principal contractor. All of that information has to line up so that the building control body can issue their final certificate and that all of that information is aligned. However, we require individual declarations from the principal designer and from the principal contractor, or from each principal designer and each principal contractor involved in the project. And their declaration is actually declaring that they've carried out their duties under the building regulations. And so if we go back and remember what the duties of the principal designer and principal contractor were, their duty is to ensure collaboration and cooperation between all of the designers, but their duty is also to ensure that those designers and the design overall complies with the building regulations. And likewise with the principal contractors, their duties is to ensure collaboration and cooperation between all of the contractors and to ensure that all of the work that has been carried out complies with the building regulations. So it's important to note that when those principal designers and principal contractors are declaring that they carried out their duties under Part 2A of the building regulations, that is what they are declaring, that the work complies with the building regulations. We'll have a brief look now at the transitional arrangements. So, any application or initial notice or application submitted to a local authority where the initial notice was submitted before the 1st of October, then that work can continue under the previous building regulation regime, but it is on the proviso that work starts by the 6th of April 2024. So you've got 6 months to start that work. And then the duty holder regimes, the notifications, etc. don't come into play on those projects. If work has not started by the 6th of April 2024, then all of those duty holder regimes, the requirement to provide notifications, the requirement to provide completion declarations will come into force, and those projects will be subject to the new regime. Initial notices and applications submitted to local authorities and approved inspectors after the 1st of October 2023, they automatically fall under that new regime and will be subject to the notifications, the additional information required to submit the initial notice, notifications of the duty holders and when the duty holders change, and those compliance declarations will be applicable to all of that system. And before a building control body can issue a final certificate, those compliance declarations will be required. And finally, looking at the responsibilities and who's responsible for various aspects of the work. During the design phase of the work, essentially the principal designer is responsible for making sure that there's the collaboration and cooperation to look at those designs and to ensure that if the building work is carried out with those, in accordance with those designs, the building work will comply with the building regulations. During the construction phase, the principal contractor comes to the fore, and the principal contractor is the main person in charge of ensuring that cooperation and collaboration between duty holders and ensuring that the work carried out complies with the building regulations. During both phases, the client has their duties to make sure that their principal designer and principal contractors are competent, and to make sure that they give sufficient time and resources for that project to be executed. Underneath all of this, the building control body will be in the background there looking at these duties and looking at the building work for compliance with the building regulations. And so when we start to think about what this change is meaning for us, this change is about the processes and procedures that we carry out, and also the roles and responsibilities. The technical aspects of the building regulations are not changing as a result of these changes to the regulations. The roles and responsibilities are clearly defined under that duty holder system for the client, designers, contractors, principal designers and principal contractors. Building control will be looking for evidence that those duty holders are carrying out those duties, and looking for the evidence that the proposed building work and the building work is complying with the building regulations. That brings us to the end of the presentation, and so we are now open for any questions that you may have, and we'll try our best to provide answers to those questions. Thank you.